Now, how troubling is it, do you think, or should it be to a Christian to just be able to say something like, yeah, Luke got this wrong?
We're going to take a look at a clip from agnostic atheist Alex O'Connor and Dr. Bart Ehrman talk about a contradiction in the Gospel of Luke concerning the birth of Jesus. Stick around because then we'll review the historical data together.
One historical contradiction of sorts that I find really fascinating is fascinating to me because it isn't a contradiction between Gospels, but rather a historical problem within one of the Gospels itself. And that is, we've already mentioned this census. We mentioned it very briefly, but the story as to why Jesus needs to travel from Bethlehem, from Nazareth up to Bethlehem, why Joseph and Mary have to travel up to Bethlehem for the birth of Jesus, is because of the census where Joseph, for some reason, has to go back to the sort of place of his lineage, and so he has to travel all the way up here. And this is said to happen, and it seems strange to me why this detail is even given. It's said that this happened while Quirinius is the governor of Syria.
Yeah.
Why is that specified, and why is that a problem?
Well, it's specified because Luke especially, I'd say more than the other Gospels, wants to situate the things that happen in a real historical moment. And, they don't date things the way we do. So you can't say, yeah, this was in the year, 5 BCE. They don't have calendars like that. And so they date things by who was ruling when. This is very common in the Roman world. You say, this happened when so-and-so was the consul, for the second time. It's how they date things. And so he's dating this. He's saying this is during when the census that happened when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. But the problem is that Quirinius became the governor of Syria 10 years after Herod the Great had died. And Luke is also specific that this happened during the reign of Herod the Great. And so he just didn't, he didn't know. And you think, well, how could he not know? Well, okay, so 60 years ago was, I guess it was probably in the 1970s. And suppose I say something about how, George Shultz was the Secretary of State when, Richard Nixon was the president. I don't think that's true. I don't know if that's true or not. See, I don't even know. And I've got a PhD, and I have newspapers and books and things. I don't think George Shultz was the Secretary of State till later. But you associate people in your head, and so he's saying this thing about Quirinius, and he's wrong. He couldn't have been. It's a contradiction with known facts. We know when Quirinius was the governor of Syria from a number of ancient sources that have no stake in the matter. Josephus just tells us when he was the governor of Syria, and it was, after Herod the Great was dead for 10 years.
So this seems to be a flat contradiction. Again, not because we've got sort of two competing sources and they say things a little bit differently, but within a singular narrative. What do Christians say about this contradiction?
Well, what they usually say is that they come up with some explanation that Quirinius was a governor again, that they invent a different rule of Quirinius, or they, or they say, all the other sources got it wrong. Actually, Luke is right. You've got to say something, but usually they say something about how there was a local census under Quirinius, and it's referring to that one. But then they can't resolve the thing with Herod without just saying that the other sources are wrong, or that this was the second time Quirinius was governor of Syria, which is not true either.
Yeah. Now, how troubling is it, do you think, or should it be to a Christian to just be able to say something like, yeah, Luke got this wrong?
Now, as you can see on the screen, there's three main issues to address here from the claims of Dr. Bart Ehrman. Firstly, the word governor. The second is, when was Quirinius actually ruling? And thirdly, when did Herod die? When you hear this bell, I will list the sources of each of the historical documents in the description below to support my argument. What we want to evaluate here is whether or not, based on the historical data, was it reasonable for Luke to make the claims that he did. First point, the word governor. The word governor used in the English translation is not necessarily an accurate representation. Luke uses the word hegemonio, which in the Greek, according to Dr. Mounts, means to rule, govern, or lead. Luke uses an active voice when using hegemonio to show the subject Quirinius is ruling, leading, or governing. Therefore, the word that Luke is actually using is not an indication of political office. It's actually an action to show that Quirinius is ruling, leading, or governing at the time. Now, let's address when Quirinius was actually ruling or governing, and it's important to keep those definitions in mind. Quirinius was a Roman official who lived in 51 BC to AD 21. He was a senator, consul, and legate in his time. He was written about by Josephus, Suetonius, and even Augustus himself, who described him as a man of great dignity. Now remember the argument that Dr. Ehrman's making. He's saying Quirinius was governor in 6 AD, and Herod died in 4 BC, which is a 10-year gap, and there's your Bible contradiction. And based on church history and tradition, it is thought that Jesus was born on 3rd or 4th BC. So how is this addressed? The claim is Dr. Ehrman says that Christians just invent another rule. However, this is not necessarily an accurate representation. There is an inscription from a tombstone in Tripoli that says its owner was once twice legate of Augustus in Syria. Now, keep in mind, the owner's name is not mentioned, but it does provide that someone was twice legate. Now, this tombstone does not belong to Quirinius. The historical data doesn't support that, but it does support the fact that someone was twice governor in Syria under Augustus. That is simply a historical fact. So here's where the definition of hegemonio comes into play. Luke's claim is not that he was governor in terms of holding a political office, but he was ruling or leading or governing at the time of Jesus' birth. So he was exercising some form of authority in the region. That is the claim.
In his book, Was Christ Born at Bethlehem?, Sir William Ramsay noted the only certain dates in the life of Quirinius are his consulship in BC 12, his second government of Syria beginning in AD 6, and his prosecution of his former wife Domitia Lepida in AD 20, and his death and public funeral in AD 21. The only other major event that is known in his role in Syria leading the war against the Homenadensans sometime between 12 BC and 6 AD.
So even if he wasn't governor before 6 AD, the historical data actually points to the fact that he was leading or ruling or governing in some capacity during his military campaigns in the region within the specified time that Luke is actually writing about. So it's not unreasonable for Luke to make the claim based on his use of the Greek word and based on the historical data of where Quirinius was at in the region at the time to say that he was ruling, leading, or governing during the reign of Herod at the time of Jesus' birth. So this leads us to our third point. When did actually King Herod die? It's important to address this point because it is the academic consensus that King Herod died in 4 BC based on the writings of Josephus. So this part is quite simple. The dates for King Herod's death are based on Josephus' writings. And the manuscripts show that there's actually conflicting data as to whether or not he died in 4 BC or 1 BC. The majority position is 4 BC and the minority position is 1 BC. However, this is all based on historical data and not Christian inventions. In summary, it's not unreasonable for Luke to claim that Quirinius was ruling, leading, or governing during the time of Jesus' birth under the reign of Herod. The historical data does support the fact that Quirinius was in a capacity of authority during his military campaigns during Jesus' birth, as well as in 6 AD after Jesus' birth. That is a historical fact and it's not a Christian invention. Both Alex and Dr. Ehrman are distinguished academics, but please keep in mind everyone looks through a presuppositional lens and has their own biases, including myself. To claim that there is no historical data and merely Christian inventions to deal with this alleged biblical contradiction within the Gospel of Luke is simply misrepresenting the historical facts.